Three. Shalom. You
Shalom,
have,
Yossi.
good to see you. Thank you for coming on. Do you have something to add to this? How did you listen to the whole thing?
Oh yes, I mean yesterday I was listening to it, and yeah, I sent it to you today. Uh, would like to give some background information,
Sure.
context here
Yes,
of
please.
the type of Baptist that Doctor. His name is Doctor James White. He
Okay.
has a very impactful apologetics ministry throughout the United States, I'm sure the world,
Mhm.
and he is a good theologian, very good historian. And he is a Calvinistic Baptist holding to the 1689, which is basically the Westminster Confession for the Presbyterian Church, but as for Baptists. And this movement has grown. It's come back full steam in many Baptist communities. And kind of the context for this in American evangelicalism, if you go to the 1920s, there was the Scopes monkey trial. Everybody remembers that. It was kind of a real demeaning type of thing of the institutionalized educational system, uh, forbidding, maybe creationism and allowing evolution to be taught in the schools, which really went against these type of evangelical churches. I mean, it was hard for Darwinian thought as theological liberalism to get the upper hand. And this was a movement more theological. It wasn't historical. And towards the mid of 20th century, a Christian theologian who was the first editor of Christianity Today, called Carl F. H. Henry, wrote a book called The Uneasy Conscience of Fundamentalism. And it was basically, we were laughed at as believers, as Messianic Noahites, as Baptists of all
Mhm.
stripes, as being anti-intellectual.
Right.
And that's a very valid thing. I mean, many of the Bible colleges, that was when the Bible college movement started, and they went into like Princeton Seminary in the 1920s. A theologian named Gresham Machen fought for Princeton Seminary not to go the liberalism route
Mhm.
theologically, which is basically German higher criticism from all sides. And he then began what was called Westminster Theological Seminary, which became the flagship of this more of a Calvinistic stream again, but reconstituted in a fundamentalist stream, and also with Dutch, Scottish elements. As old Princeton was, it was Scottish, and the Dutch. There was some Dutch theologians that came in, Gerhardus Voss, and later Cornelius Van Til, an apologist who's very, very, very uh, widely interpreted in various fields. I've mentioned him when we were talking about this in a few podcasts. But Carl F. H. Henry wasn't that. He was also a Baptist, and he wrote. He wanted to bring. He wanted to bring back um, this anti-intellectualism, which was tied very much to the premillennialist dispensationalist bring back Jesus Christ in the second coming, go to all the nations, train people in Bible colleges, don't worry about the intellectual streams, and let's just get on with the task. And this is really what captivated the United States in the 19 or the in the mid 20th century. So James White is like I am. His pilgrimage is very similar to mine. Growing up in this fundamentalist world of just believers, grassroots people. I mean, he maybe implies these are Kentucky, deep South people. Understanding, I just drove through there before Christmas,
Mhm.
and it's there's little Baptist churches in every corner, and they're still there, and lots of these King James onlys, which is another beside the point in this. But still, this whole movement to keep it is an observant faith. It is like what we were talking before. Some legalisms involved,
Yeah.
but it is a line of. I think they took the brunt of mockery in the 20th century, and many
Yeah.
evangelicals, including Billy Graham. Billy Graham was very much involved with Carl F. H. Henry in this project to bring respectability, academic, political, cultural respectability to evangelicals of all stripes. Mostly like Baptist Brethren type of denominations, Pentecostals included, who were a little bit farther behind because they were never accepted in. But that
So there's maybe the origin of the problem there, because when we saw in the time of Martin Luther King, these were very pure churches, but then after Billy Graham, to get acceptable in the political arena does require getting into bed with the beast to a certain extent, and that is
academia, yeah.
academia,
Hmm.
politics.
Hmm.
This is where the faithful church turns into the whore of Babylon. You see, so this is where things go wrong, I think. And what we need to do is say, okay, yes, you do need to be a bit. I understood his criticism. How much of the show did you see? Did you see all of it, or just?
Yeah, I was kind of following both I had to go back to the beginning as well,
Yeah.
and you were very fair.
Yeah.
And I believe,
So I
yeah, this
understand his criticism. He's got
yes,
valid criticism. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And but he's coming from, see, but this is the thing. He's coming at it from a theological, academic reaction.
Mhm.
And I'm not discounting his theology. I mean, I was trained in a Reformed seminary. I know many people who love his ministry. These are the people that I fellowship with. But at the end of the day, when it is still not only Baptist successionism that is true, even though he says, he's pointing out this landmark people in Kentucky, but he's also never going to get there because he's still a supersessionist, and
Mhm.
because he's loaded up with Reformation reaction,
Mhm.
and Reformation sorted a lot of things out. I believe justification by faith, it sorted that out. It
Mhm.
sorted a lot of things out, but it's still Romanism because it's still captured into the political,
Right.
academic respectability camp, and I'm included in that. I've had to wean myself. Many years it took me to get it out of my system, but
Oh
coming
yeah,
back
well,
to this,
me too. You know, I wasn't always what you can say like a fanatic ultra orthodox believer. You know, I came to this, but I had to go through that as well. It's just I think when you're trudging through this, you get to a point of realizing absolutely everything can be criticized or questioned from the academic point of view. You know, absolutely everything,
Mhm, mhm,
and then
mhm.
you realize that the only thing which becomes valid, therefore, is what you yourself decide is valid depending on your intellectual capabilities. If you can argue it, it's valid. If you can argue against it, it's not valid. Well, this is no way to this is no rudder. You know, this is not a rudder. This is just following your own heart and your own ego. This is actually setting yourself up for self-worship. So I had to turn my back away from that. I have to turn it back on it and turn away from that to something which was more authentic. At least in my understanding, what was more authentic was Jesus saying, "Obey the Pharisees," and there we have it. Like, well, there you go. If the head of the community of people who are considered to be the enemies of Judaism is saying, "Obey the Pharisees," and our Pharisees are saying, "Yeah, that's right, we're right," then you've got some kind of two independent witnesses here, an objective rudder. It's not subjective; it's really objective. Then you get into it, and you can say, well, when you get into it on the Judaic level, you can say, well, actually, the whole thing is subjective because you find out that the Pharisees are not enemies towards Jesus, neither to Jesus' apostles. But
And this is a road. This is a road that they do not explore. The
no, we don't.
textual commitments, I think, are lagging again. They've done. I mean, especially this theological reaction, especially from the new Calvinists,
Mhm.
and that they've come at it from the systematic theological grid. They've tried to go back to biblical theology, but it's all about how the Jews blew it in the Old Testament, and then they needed to be replaced, and everything is fulfilled in Jesus. Okay, there's streams of that make sense, but when you come back to real supersessionism and it's embedded is because still they use the term Pharisee as a sweeping statement of those who are under the law or those who missed it. They're the
Those who missed it.
Jew who was seeking salvation by works, which is basically what was the reformers' critique of Rome. And that's what's read into it all. So they're never able to get beyond that
Mm.
sweeping statement of a Pharisee and understand the nuance of really that Jesus's ministry confirms that he was a Pharisee, that he was conversant in the Pharisee, and he was conversant in the oral Torah. And this is what they
Right.
hashed out in the New Testament Sermon on the Mount first. I mean, right off the bat, Sermon on the
Mhm.
Mount is totally Mishnah,
Mhm.
totally Hillel
Yeah.
type of, it's a Hillel sermon.
Yeah.
And so you're coming at these things back to the text. And very few evangelical New Testament scholars are able to break free from this historical Jesus pursuit that's kind of left them wanting because they're still there, but they see that, yeah, this is a Jewish Jesus. And it's an uncomfortable area to go because they've been so embedded with a subtle supersessionism, as I like to say. They wouldn't say, this is why we're going to get into Romans
Mhm.
and obviously the big straw man of rabbinical Judaism, as we were dealing with in our last series,
Yeah.
historical Christianity, apostolic Judaism. So the reality of James White addressing this, yes, this is all I've wanted to say, that he's addressing this theologically or historical theological critique. He's got valid points, but history has so many layers and so much we do not know. And that's why I sent you even the Seventh Day Adventist program lineage, because they're digging into things.
Mhm.
Many of these Baptist groups were also Sabbatarian. Many of these
That's right.
Baptist groups were very very strong Sabbatarians. And this is coming back. Of course, the Presbyterians held that, but in a replacement theological sense, but out of Puritanism. And this is all well and good because they're affirming something. Of course, it wasn't the seventh day; it became the Lord's Day. But at least that there's this type of reckoning again, of a Noahide structure. And this is, this is obviously, when we get into this uneasy conscience of fundamentalism, we lost our way on discipleship, and so we're a reaction against this easy believism that Billy Graham didn't intentionally set into motion, but it was set into motion by the crusade evangelism. You'll get saved, come up front, get baptized, you're a believer. So, but Billy Graham obviously did very well. I went forward in a Billy Graham crusade in 1972 in Cleveland Stadium, and I had someone from the Navigators following me up. I'm just a little boy, 10 years old, and someone's coming from the east side of Cleveland to follow me up. And so he knew what he was doing, but that's the question. I mean, always, when we bring in someone who comes to be a messianist, how do we teach them to be a Noahide? And and James White is doing that as well. I mean, but they get lost in this, just argue, because it's an American context. There's, America has been watered down. Evangelicalism is, like they like to say, a mile wide and inch deep, and he's addressing those type of concerns. So when you get someone with like some hayseed hick from Kentucky Baptist still hanging on to their traditions, and maybe it's King James, and that's okay. I like the King James, but that's a whole Textus Receptus Masoretic text argument that has been debunked somewhat with manuscript evidence. But I still look at them as observant, and I look at them observant in culture, and perhaps they opted out of the intellectual head-on discussions, but we always have to go back to these observant cultures, and they're mostly found in rural areas.
Right.
They're not found in the cities. And the last thing I want to do is criticize someone like that as not being spiritual or
Right.
not knowing the Lord Jesus Christ, because I was a pastor of Latin American immigrants here in Italy, who didn't have any education, but I saw their faith. I saw the reality of the Holy Spirit in their lives, and I saw their tremendous drive to be holy according to the Noahide laws.
Right.
And this is what we get. And so,
Yeah.
I mean,
what
we're
I
just trying to balance this out, but we want to bring that narrative back, because I think this is
Oh,
the
yeah.
narrative that's being lost if we're going to make a God out of academia, scholarship, or whatever. All good terms, perhaps not so easy to sometimes define, but to really come back to religious tradition. And Joe, thank you, because we need Judaism for that religious tradition. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much for the comments. I mean, absolutely. Would I prefer that team we saw last week? I can't remember the name. Beavis and
No,
Butthead.
no.